In the previous lecture, we learned about HTTPS and how we can carry out secure communication between the client and the server. We also learned a little bit about cryptography, enough to understand how HTTPS works. For us to configure our HTTPS server, we need to obtain a public key and certificate. We will now configure our Confusion server to use HTTPS in this exercise. So let's proceed forward. First, to generate the key and the certificate that we can use for our server, and then thereafter modify our Express application to support HTTPS. To get started on this exercise, go to the Confusion server folder and then in your terminal or command window, and then go to the bin folder inside the Confusion server folder. And in the bin folder, you will see a file named www. This is the folder where we are going to generate our private key and then also generate the certificate for our HTTPS server using a command line tool called as Openssl. Now, Openssl is typically installed on Mac OS machines by default. For Windows machines, you may need to download and install Openssl explicitly. Now, I have provided a couple of links in the instructions for you to go and fetch Openssl. I have also provided you with a website where you can generate self-signed private key and certificate. So let's go and take a quick look at that. If you are running a Windows machine and if you don't have Openssl already installed, then this link provides binaries for Openssl that you can download and install on your Windows machine. So this link is provided in the instructions for this exercise. So going in there, you will find several downloads of third-party Openssl related distributions that you can download and install on your computer. So install one of these in order to proceed ahead with this exercise if you don't have Openssl already on your machine. Now, also, if you want another way of generating your private key and certificate, here is a blog article, a link to which I have already provided in the instructions, which explains also how to set up your Windows machine with Openssl and also generate the private key and certificate. So walk through these steps to configure your Windows machine for generating the private key and certificate. Now, if you don't want to install Openssl, then here is a link to a site which allows you to generate the self-signed SSL certificate and key, as you see here. So a link to this site is also provided in the instructions. So you can use this server to generate the SSL certificate and key for your Windows machine. So any one of these approaches can be used for generating the private key and the certificate for your Windows machine. Since I am running on an OS X machine, I'm going to generate my private key and certificate using Openssl. So going to the terminal, let me type Openssl gen RSA and 1024, meaning that I'm going to generate a private key of size 1024. So I'm going to put this into a file named private key. And once this is generated, then we will generate the corresponding cert.csr file. So we'll say Openssl request. So we are requesting for a new certificate with the key private.key, and we will generate that cert.csr here. Now, when you generate the cert.csr, it'll come up with a few questions for you to fill in. You can accept the default values, or you can fill in your own values if you choose to. It doesn't really matter because this certificate we are using only within our computer to test our HTTPS server. So let me fill in some details. I'm I'm going to leave a few of the things empty there, and that'll work just fine. It doesn't really matter whether you fill in this information or not. So once you do that, your cert.csr is generated, and from that we will generate the distribution certificate. So for that, we'll type at the command prompt Openssl x509 -rec -in cert.csr and -sign key private.key and -out certificate.pem. So this will generate the certificate for us. And so once you complete these steps, when you look at your folder, you would see that you have the private key, the cert.csr and certificate.pem in there. These would be required for configuring our HTTPS server. So now to configure HTTPS server, let's go to our editor. In the editor, we will go to this bin folder here, and in the bin folder you see this file called www. We briefly looked at this file in one of the earlier exercises. Now going into this file, we are now going to also import the HTTPS core module. So we'll say HTTPS require HTTPS. And we will also require the file system module. We have already encountered the file system module earlier in one of the exercises. So we'll import both of these. And then going down here, we will configure the port number at which our HTTPS server will be running. So we'll say app set, and we'll say sec port. So we're going to set up a variable here called secure port, and then I will initialize this to port plus 443. Now why do I use this port plus 443? In a standard server, if your server is acting as a web server, your HTTP protocol will be running at port number 80 on your server, and the secure HTTP will run on port number 443. Now you would normally not want to use those reserved ports in a development application that we are doing in this course. Instead, as you saw earlier, we had configured our port number to 3000 where our HTTP server is running. So I'm going to be running the HTTPS server at port number 3443. So 3000 plus 443. So that's the reason why I am declaring this secure port as port plus 443. So that our HTTPS server will be running at port number 443. I will still be running the HTTP server at port 3000. We have already created the HTTP server here in the www, or rather this is automatically generated by the Express generator. Now, so since the HTTP server is already configured, we are now going to configure the HTTPS server. So to configure the HTTPS server, right after where we configure the HTTP server. Now the reason why I'm going to still run the HTTP server is that if I get a request on the HTTP server's port, then that request will be redirected to the HTTPS server. So my server will only service requests coming in on the HTTPS ports. But if by chance anybody accesses the server at the HTTP port, I will redirect that request to the HTTPS port. We will do that a little bit later. First, let's configure our HTTPS server. So to configure the HTTPS server, right here, I will declare a few options here for my HTTPS server. Now recall that for an HTTPS server, we need to configure the private key and the certificate that my HTTPS server is going to use. So in the options, I'm going to specify key And then I will use the file system, and then I'll say read file sync. So I will read this file synchronously so that I will complete reading in the file before I can configure my HTTPS server. So I'm going to read in this file from the _dir name. You already know why I use _dir name from the previous exercise where we saw the file system module being used. And then so we'll say _dir name plus. So here we supply the path to the private.key. Now recall that this www is in the bin folder, and the private.key is also in the bin folder. So that's why when I say dir name plus this, so this will specify to the file system read module that the file should be read from this bin directory from the private.key file here. Now also we will read in the certificate here. So we'll say cert fs read file sync. So we'll synchronously read the file, which means that the file will be read completely before you proceed on to the next step here. And the file that we need to read is also _dir name plus, and we'll say certificate.pem, which we have generated earlier. And that should be a comma, and I should not put a semicolon there because this is a JavaScript object that we have defined as the options. So once we define the JavaScript object, then let's configure the secure server. So we'll say var secure server HTTPS. Recall that now we're going to be using HTTPS, and then we'll say create server. So recall that for HTTP, we configured our server like this here. For the secure server, we're going to create that by saying var secure server HTTPS create server, and then we will supply the options which we have just configured, and then the second part is app here. So my secure server is also going to be available for my app to access. Now down below here, I'm going to configure the secure server to listen on port number the secure port. Recall that here we had done an app.set secure port. So we set this value here to the secure port number, and then down below here we are saying app.get. So this means that this value that we have configured earlier will be available to us to configure our listening port for our server. So we'll say app.get secure port, and then supply the callback function here, and inside this callback function we'll say console log server listening on port let's do secure server listening on port. And then once we configure the secure server, then we need to say secure server on. So if the secure server receives an error event, then we will let the on error, which is configured down below, to handle that. And then we'll say secure server on listening. So if you receive the listening event, then we will call the on listening. Now, where are this on error and on listening configured? If you go down into the code here, down below here, you're specifying these two functions, the on error function here, and then the on listening function here. So we're going to be using these two functions for configuring our server here. So with these changes, my server is now configured to also run the secure server at port number 443. We have already configured the standard HTTP server here already. So once we have done these two, then our next update will be in the app.js file. So going to app.js file, what I'm going to do is to configure this server such that it will redirect any traffic coming to the unsecured port, that is port number 3000. It'll redirect the requests to the secure port. So to do that, let me set up a middleware right after we declare the app.express. So here we'll say app.all, so which means for all requests, no matter what the path in the request is, all requests coming in, I'm going to redirect that to, so we'll say res next, and the callback function being defined here. And so we'll declare the function inside here, and we'll say if rec.secure. So meaning that if the incoming request is already a secure request. So how do we know that? If the incoming request is already a secure request, then the request object will carry this flag called secure, which will be already set to true. If the incoming request is not at our secure port, but instead is coming to the insecure port, then the rec.secure will not be set. So that is what I am checking here. If it is coming to the secure port already, I'm just going to go forward without doing anything because it's already coming to the secure port. So I can simply say next. Otherwise, so we'll say return next. Otherwise, so the otherwise will occur when it is coming to the insecure port. So in this case, I will say res redirect. So the redirect method is available, which redirects the incoming request to another URL. So I will redirect this insecure request to HTTPS://. So I'm redirecting this request to the rec.hostname. So the request will already carry the host name. It also, because this is coming to the same server, so I'm redirecting to the same server, and then we'll say plus app.get. Now recall that we had already configured the secure port in the app.get there. So we'll say app.get sec port plus rec.url. Now this rec.url will contain the rest of the path except the host name and the port number. So if you say localhost :3000, that localhost :3000 will be covered by the first part, and this will be redirected to localhost :3443 by this configuration here. And then the rest of it, the rec.url, will contain the actual path on this server. So we just add it to the redirect path. And this is the path to which I'm going to redirect the incoming request message. So once I redirect the incoming request message, then my request message will be redirected to the secure port. And one last change to the rest.redirect, we will add the return status code as 307. 307 here represents that the target resource resides temporarily under a different URI, and the user agent must not change the request method if it performs an automatic redirection to that URI. So we are expecting the user agent to retry with the same method that they have used for the original endpoint. That's it. That's the change that I need to make in the app.js file. So having changed the app.js and the www and also generated the key and the certificate, we can now save the changes and go and start our server. Going to the terminal or the command window, make sure that you're back in your Confusion Server folder and then start the server. So at the terminal, type npm start. And your server will be up and running. And you also notice that we are printing out here saying secure server listening on port number 3443 here. To access the secure server, go to a browser like Chrome here, and then let me first access the secure server at localhost 3443, which is where my secure server is running. And notice that when I type the HTTPS :/localhost 3443 in the browser, it will come up with this message here saying your connection is not private. Obviously, because the certificate that we are using right now is a self-signed certificate, and this is not recognized by Chrome as a valid certificate. But since we know what we are doing, it's okay for us to accept that we are going to be allowing to proceed to this particular server. Now, I would strongly advise you never to do this on any site that comes up with the suggestion. We are doing this specifically in this exercise because we know exactly where the server is and we know that we have explicitly configured the server ourselves. But if any other website comes up with this message, I would strongly advise you not to accept the suggestion and proceed to access the server. So you should jump back to safety if you ever see this on any other website. But since we know that this is our own server, I'm going to proceed to the localhost here, and then you would see that we are accessing the Express server. And also you would notice up here that your browser is showing you that you are accessing an insecure server. When you click on that, you would see that message here saying your connection to the site is not secure. But we know that since we are running the server ourselves, this is okay to do so. So this is how you would be accessing the HTTPS server. Now let me try to access the same HTTPS server, but let me access the standard localhost :3000. This is where our insecure server or the normal HTTP server is running. So when I try to access that HTTP localhost :3000, then you immediately see that my server will redirect me to the secure server. So this way, your server that we have just configured ensures that you will always access the server on its secure port. This also guarantees the fact that when you are exchanging, when you are sending in your credentials and so on, all the exchange of the credentials in the header of the message, and also when you log in with the local authentication, all that is done in a secure manner, in an encrypted channel between your client and the server. So now we have configured our server to be a secure HTTPS server. With this, we complete this exercise. In this exercise, we have learned how to configure a secure HTTP server or using the HTTPS protocol. With this, we complete this exercise. This is a good time for you to do a git commit with the message HTTPS.